Hey everybody, I'm Amanda with DevExpress and welcome to the third webinar in our Take a Tour 12.1 series, Touch, Dazzling Design, Developer Delivered, presented by the Creative Director here at DevExpress, Tim Adlin. In this design-centric webinar, Tim will explain the design concepts integrated into the project templates and demo applications built into DXperience 12.1. Tim will walk through the design decisions that we've made and how to approach design concepts for the typical developer. You can see how to approach design concepts in building applications right now and learn how to use the DevExpress templates and samples as a starting approach to your app design. Tim will answer questions at the end of the session, but you can enter your questions at any time in the questions section of your control panel. Now, before we get started, DevExpress would love to know a little bit more about all of you joining us today, so we do have a couple of poll questions for you, and here is the first one. Do you have a designer as part of your development team? You can select one or more of the following, yes or no. That's a pretty easy one, and I'll give everybody just a second to get their answers in. So it looks like about 75% are no and 25% are yes. They do have a designer. All right, thank you for voting. And then our next question is, what platform is your current primary platform, the one you use most often? WinForms, WPF, Silverlight, ASP.NET, or HTML5. And I'll give everyone just a second to get that answer in. It looks like 65% ASP.NET and 65% WinForms. You can't answer more than one in this question. All right, perfect. All right, thanks so much for your valuable feedback. And again, thanks for joining us. I will now hand things over to Tim Adlin.
Hi there. Well, thank you all for joining today. I'm really excited to be here, be able to talk to you about design and development for Touch. I know that most of us here are deep into this world, but I want to go over some fundamentals today. It seems from that poll, which I appreciate that you all responded to, or most of you responded to, that you do have an eye for design and understand how it integrates with development. And so what I want to do is just kind of talk about some high-level ideas about how we look at design for Touch and web, and how DevExpress might be able to help with designing those products and applications that you're using. So thank you very much for the introduction, Amanda. That was very nice. My name is Tim Adlin. I am the creative director for DevExpress. This is a picture that was taken by my 5-year-old with an iPad, a touch device, and I thought that that might be quite appropriate for this discussion. If at any time you want to reach me directly, please feel free to send me a direct email at tadlin@devexpress.com, or you can always follow me on Twitter. I'm coming to this conversation with about 15 years of deep experience working for many companies through industries that we all know and love, and designing touch experiences over the various platforms that we have to consider at this point. What I want to talk to you about specifically today are just a few things. Now, I'm going to be doing many webinars as we go forward, but I'd like to focus on just a few core topics right now. And so what I'd like to focus on today are really taking a look at grids and grid structure, designing for our device. We have a few different devices right now that we really have to consider, but each one of those devices has its own particular intricacies. So we will get into those a little bit. taking a look at the intent of the user and what we are trying to present to our end user, as well as the interactivity that we have available now, given our various platforms, and how we scale our design given our intent and these new interactive paradigms. So, stepping back just for a quick second, as a designer, I've been presented with the make it look pretty argument quite often, but then I have to quickly explain, and fortunately, I think over the last 5 years, this has become less of an argument, how design is really a science. Yes, we can make things shiny and pretty, but what we're looking at are really more fundamentals. And what I'm presenting here in this slide is the golden spiral, the golden ratio, which we can see every day throughout our life. On our left-hand side, we have a nautilus shell, which shows this very particular 1 to 1.618 ratio. As well, on the right-hand side, we have this beautiful cathedral structure that adheres to this grid. And I think maybe even a better example is the Mona Lisa. Many of us know this example where we can see how this design has been specifically designed according to science, right? And so what I want to show is that design is not just making things pretty. And I'm really glad to hear that so many of you have designers as an integral part of your teams. As a designer, I think that's important. And as somebody that's interested in business, I definitely think that is important. A more maybe appropriate example is looking at an actual grid, right? This is one of our grid structures. And if we start to break it down, you start to see how things line up and are appropriate. This is something that we deal with kind of every day, right, as we're developing our products. I want to show you an example of something that is maybe a little bit more abstract, which is this example for an application for credit. And even zoomed out like this, we can see quite easily how the differences in emphasis in text, creating a grid structure around the information that we're asking for, makes it easier for both the user and the business owner to be able to understand that information. Just at the very beginning of this, these two images on the left-hand side, application for credit in all caps, as opposed to credit application in deep black text and not all caps. The different form fields, essentially, that we have, making it known what we are asking for, right? As opposed to the giant, maybe more free-form fields that look a little bit more like they're asking for an essay, essentially, right? Almost a college application. And on our right-hand side, I tried to break down this structure into its component parts so we can see how these two things differ in some fundamental levels. So, I think this idea is probably something that we can all agree on, I'm hoping. Happy to take questions on it later, but as developers and designers, I think this is something we can agree on. I want to show you a real-world example of something that I had to deal with recently, which was taking a look at our advertising. So this is an advertisement that we have run a few times, and there were some things that were making me a little bit unsure about how we were putting our face forward, but I couldn't really explain it. So what I did was I gridded it out, just like I was showing you earlier. And what I saw once I started putting it into a grid was there was really no grid. And this was causing the fundamental problem. We have various margins, various diagonals, and it was causing some dissonance. So what I did is I boiled down the information that we were trying to give out to our audience and put it in a much more easily digestible grid structure and distill it down to some more fundamentals. And so what we have here on the left-hand side is what we had, and what we have here on the right-hand side is my suggestion. It's not necessarily saying that this is what we're going for, but this explains my point of, at this point, we have the red diagonals are opposites at the same level, and we have a very structured grid, and the information is a lot more digestible, right? So more fundamentally, let's take a look at the New York Times and this great Indianapolis Museum of Art site. And this is how grid structures might speak a little bit more towards what we're doing. We're not all in the advertising industry, let's say, but designing a lot of sites and applications. And what I wanted to show here are different grid structures that we could potentially use. The New York Times site on the left-hand side has fewer columns. It's a much more structured grid. The one on the right, the Museum of Art, has many more columns, but is still a very structured grid. Now, the New York Times is giving forth very deep and important information, and the Indianapolis Museum of Art, by its function, is a little bit more artsy, let's say. I'll put that in quotes, right? But we can still see that the fundamentals are there. And this makes it both easier for designers to design the pages because there's some sort of structure and fundamentals that they can adhere to, as well as developers, because they don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time, which is one of the things that we're trying to do at DevExpress, is be able to provide tools that imbue design into our tools so you as developers don't have to think about and reinvent all of these sorts of ideas. One thing that I've been getting into recently that I found very, very important and useful when designing, especially websites. Now, this may not be quite as important for applications, but I think the fundamentals and theory of what I'm talking about is important, is thinking about grids and understanding what you're designing for. And let me show you this example. So, designing for the web, I love this sample, and this is cssgrid.net. And so what this is a 12-column grid built for 1140 pixels. And you can see as we scroll down, it adapts. And then once we get to a certain point, what we have is a mobile viewable UI. So it understands using CSS. I'm a big proponent of CSS3 and HTML5. Not all applications and websites are ready for that, but when appropriate, I say go for it. And what this uses is CSS3 to understand what we are looking at and what the scale of our web browser is. So being able to understand what we're designing for and be able to adapt for it, I think is very important. But that also means understanding what we are designing for. And if we're designing applications for a very specific, B2B application, and we have screen requirements, well, that determines, a certain application. But if we're having to deal with the bring your own device theory, where people are bringing in their own devices to work at this point, we have to adapt to that, or all of our customers are on various devices. We have to adapt to the various screen sizes, etc. So what I'll say is, the 1140 wide responsive or adaptive grid system, I think is awesome when designing for multiple platforms or screens, which is kind of what we're talking about today. Because what we're talking about is a lot of different things. We're talking about native applications, we're talking about web applications that have to be mobile accessible. And when we talk about mobile, we're actually talking about touch. But when we're talking about touch, most of the time we're actually talking about multi-touch, which means 2 or more fingers when you're doing your spin or pinch and zoom. But then once you start talking about multi-touch, we start to talk about gestures, which gets into console devices, which starts talking about television, which starts talking about what is next. So we have to think about what is the experience that we are trying to deliver for our customer, for our client, and for our client a year or 2 from now. So we have to think about designing for the device that we're looking at. So there's a lot of differences. What's the difference between apps, the web, and touch devices? For this conversation, as you can see on the screen, I'm talking about 3 specific things. Is making sure that we understand our users' intent, what they're trying to do, where they are, what's their situation. We're talking about interactivity. How are they doing it? while trying to get toward that intent, and then being able to scale what we do to meet those two first goals. So as an example, let me pull up Foursquare. Now, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with Foursquare. I'm a big user of it. I love it. As you can see, I took this screenshot last night, but I checked in at DevExpress. So it's an application where you can use your mobile device to check in at places, earn points and stats, and make friends, and post pictures and get rewards. You check in at a restaurant and it might give you a discount, etc. So, but what I wanted to show here is not necessarily Foursquare, but the variability in the Foursquare applications across 4 devices. On our left-hand side, we have the web application. On our, as we go to our right, we have our iPad. Then we have a Windows phone, and then we have our Android phone. And you can see that there are some conventions that are being used throughout, but then there are things that are very, very different across these platforms. Let me call out, for instance, the difference between web and mobile. I'm sure that this is going to be fundamental to some people, but the many more things that you can do and how they are much more accessible using a mouse. They're smaller. And the much more detailed information that you're getting. Because what you're doing while you're using web, while you're sitting at your desk in a chair, is you're a little bit more engaged, and you can produce information and you consume it in a very different way, obviously, than when you're on a handheld device. So over here on our iPhone, we have a much more concatenated view of our information, and it's much more distilled. One thing that I do want to point out is, for instance, the iPhone and Android versions look fairly similar, except let me just point out one particular point, which is the top-level navigation, which you'll see at the bottom of the iPhone and the top of the Android phone. So this is a design convention that we have to anticipate when we're designing for these various devices. So I've talked about the various devices. Let me show you this, which makes me crazy. This graphic right here is an information graphic displaying the various sizes of Android screen resolutions. As a developer or as a designer, this is impossible, except that we have to do it, right? We have to anticipate this sorts of thing. We have almost 4,000 different devices. But then we also have different screen resolutions. The new Apple devices have beautiful Retina display. But that means it's so much more pixel dense that we have to think about developing and designing our applications not necessarily in pixels anymore, but now in points. Once again, I love Apple. I'm displaying this presentation on a Mac. But sometimes they kind of drive me crazy because now there's a fundamental new thing that we need to think about. So, for instance, we have our our close buttons or our general icons that are at their smallest 16 pixels. But with a touch device, and especially with a Retina device, we have to design for 44 pixels as our smallest size. So definitely something to think about when we're developing and designing for all of these various devices, whether it be web or touch, and really what we're talking about here is touch. I'm going to be making this presentation available later so you can access all of this. I've presented links to all of these examples. The last thing I want to talk about just real quickly for 5 seconds is you can imagine this image on its side because now you have a portrait as opposed to landscape. So you have to think about how we're designing and developing our applications for not only a wide screen, but a narrow and long screen. And we have to think about our interactions. I thought this was a nice way to describe the different things that we have to do and consider. I mentioned the 16 versus 44 pixels difference because we have giant fat fingers. But we're not only using one finger, we're often using two, and sometimes if people are doing it right, we're using more than two. And we also have to start considering for instance, the right click, where we were able to give users information in a very conventional way because we always assume the right click. Well, what if you don't have a control or command button? How do you do that? Or do you not do that at all and present that information in a different way? Hover is a very difficult thing. We've all relied on drop-downs for many years, but there is no hover when you don't have a cursor. So while you can have drop-downs, then they work on most devices, they work differently. And we have to consider if those are the right ways to deliver the information to users on those devices. Because at this point, to instance a hover state, if I was able to switch back and forth from device to device, I can show you this, but on an iPad, to instance a hover state, you touch the menu item, but then you have to touch it again, right? Which is one of the reasons that we instanced hover states, because we didn't want multiple clicks. So we need to consider that. Scrolling, vertical, horizontal, or pagination, something maybe I should have put in this slide. Because what we deal with now is the ability to, and the expectation of continually using scroll, or in the case of an application like Flipboard, which we have a good example of, you expect to be able to interact with the content continually, and pagination goes away. As well, one of the things that we have now that is fundamentally changed is the idea of horizontal scrolling, which is more like a book. When you're deeply engaged with content, the right to left scroll or left to right, depending on your language, or even up to down, depending on your language, right? It makes so much more sense. And that was something that was really, we really tried to get away from because there was no horizontal scroll in the past. And finally, let me just say this. We're not clicking anymore. We're touching, we're interacting, we're doing things. So please, if you don't mind, stop saying click here, right? Make the whole thing in HTML5, because now you can wrap a whole div and in ahref, you make the whole thing clickable. Make the whole thing clickable. So that takes care of the clicking problem. Because who knows if they're clicking, or they're touching, or gesturing. Sorry. So the basics, we have standards, which also mean choices. In this example, I'm giving through Money Monkey. We have drop-down. You could have drop-down to subnav. We said no, we're not going to do that. But we did use different fundamentals. In the iPad version, we're using the basic Chrome version of navigation because that's what users expect. And one of the things that I want to kind of get forward is being creative with some of this stuff, especially in some of our newer devices, is kind of wasted time because users are fundamentally looking for something that they understand and are used to. So, for instance, the navigation in the Chrome is something that perhaps you just do and spend your time making sure that the content is perfect. And the content is something that I want to talk about real quickly. We're in a very different mode when we're working on the web versus on an iPad. We're working in consumption on a tablet device. We're looking, and let me give you an example of, so on the web, I'm looking to buy a new car, and I want to see where my money is going, and I go to a website, I look at my finances, I categorize, I change things. I have a lot of interaction. But with an iPad or other tablet device or even the iPhone, let's say after I've done all of that work, I go home and I say, hey, honey, I'd like to get a new car. It's been 10,000 miles since my last oil change, and I've broken it. So it's time. So I see that we're spending a whole lot of money on massages or eating out. So it's that sort of thing where on the iPad or touch device, it's much more a consumptive and being able to just receive data way rather than diving deep into it as we would do on the web, where we have much more specific control. So where do we start with being able to do this? I want to point out some really, really awesome webinars that have been done by my cohort colleague and friend, Rahul Hari. Please take a look at these on our site at DevExpress.com under demos, and he will be able to get you fundamentally into how to do this, especially using our specific controls. He's done a great job, and there's no reason for me to redo that. But I also want to guide you to a couple nice talks by Tim Huckabee, who has talked about natural user interfaces around touch and design. So once again, I will make this slide available as soon as possible directly after our conversation. I'd like to take you through kind of a specific example of something that we built called Money Monkey. So Money Monkey is a financial application that we built to help our users and customers understand some of the fundamentals and how we're taking a look at design around our various platforms and devices. So Money Monkey, in this scenario, let's say, given the scenario I was talking about earlier, I come to a website, I take a look, hey, I'm really glad I'm on target, I've got $2,000 available, I do have $1,000 that are planned out. I can take a look at it at a general overview, and I go into, let's say, recent transactions to see where have I been spending my money. So what we have is, one of the DevExpress grid controls. What we see here is a very good and pretty standard way to describe and display information like this on the web. Hover states and the like to indicate where you are. The ability to drill into information more deeply. This is a demo, so obviously, some things are kind of for show, but the ability to drill in and get deeper into your information and interact with it in a different way. Now, what I'll show here is our iPad version, which you can fairly obviously see has a very different aesthetic and function, right? So what we're dealing is consuming the information in a very fundamentally different way. Our hits sections are bigger. Our graphs are bigger. So if we go into our transactions, you can see the difference between what we were dealing with before is fundamentally different because we're in a different mode. So what I want to leave you with is essentially these kind of 4 or 5 fundamental things, right? Keep in mind your grids, please, for both of our sakes as designers and developers, and understand that they're fundamentally different from platform to device to device to device. Design for those devices is what is appropriate. Understand your user's intent. Understand the fundamentals of the different kinds of interactivity, hover states, scrolling, where we are putting our navigation, and then also understand that scale means makes a big difference when we have things in our laps and working with fingers as opposed to cursors. Showing you just kind of quickly how we work this out under our grid system. You can see here the Money Monkey under our grid system and how we adhere to that. The differences between how we're sizing things and orienting things using different grids. Once again, just want to leave you with the fundamentals. And here we go. So my name is Tim Aylin. I'm the Creative Director for DevExpress. I hope you found this useful. I'm going to be giving more talks as we go forward, get through the years, and getting deeper into more specifics. But I hope this was helpful, and I appreciate your time. Amanda?
Hey Tim, thank you so much. All right, everybody, if you have questions for Tim on design, we also have Mehul Harry on, obviously our technical evangelist. And if you have any questions regarding ASP.NET, how Money Monkey was built, any of that, feel free to ask away. While we're waiting for questions to roll in, I do have a couple more questions for you guys. And the first one is, are you using DXperience 12.1 today? Select yes or no. It's a pretty easy one. So it looks like as the votes are rolling in, about 62% yes and 38% no. So 62% of you are currently using DXperience 12.1. And then I also have, are you developing mobile solutions for the iPad or iPhone? So you can select one or more of the following, the iPad, iPhone, or both. So it looks like 69% are both and about 29% are iPad only. I'll give you just a few, looks like people are still voting a little bit. Okay, great. And then one more for you. On a scale of 1 to 5, 5 being the most important, how much of a pain point is design in your app development process? And currently, well, initially it was 100% were 5, highest pain point, but it looks pretty spread out. So about 25% are 5 or 4, so we're up there. Looks like it's important to just about everybody out there. Awesome. All right, that's it. All right, Tim and Mehul, if you're listening, it looks like we don't have any questions yet. So it looks like you were pretty thorough, Tim.
Well, awesome. I appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, Amanda, for hosting. And I am looking forward to the next experience.
Awesome. All right, we do have some questions rolling in really quick.
Sure.
From Jay, and this looks like it's, well, can you use the iOS theme without the master page? Mehul, is that possibly a question you could pop in and answer?
Sure. So Jay, yes, a theme is essentially just like the ASP.NET theme. It's consistent of skins, CSS files, and images. So you can use the iOS theme without it. What Jay's referencing is we have these new project templates in 12.1 that make it even easier to make an iPad application, meaning so when you browse to it from your iPad, it's automatically going to detect, hey, I'm on an iPad, let me switch over and start using some native resources from the device itself, for example, scrolling. So there's a lot of these little smarts we've built in. My recommendation is if you're going to use the iOS theme, you might as well use the project template because it essentially makes that job easier for you to detect when you're on that device. So the answer is yes, you can use it without that master page. And that master page simply sets up, and it doesn't even have to be a master page, as you'll see from a couple of the other demos we've packaged in 12.1, you can absolutely put those line items that detect, for example, the JavaScript that goes in the head section, how you're supporting this.
Awesome. From Joe, is it advantageous to split out a web project and mobile device project, or use CSS to combine into one and let the resolution on the device solve the issue?
Is it advantageous to split out a web project and mobile device project and use CSS to combine into one and let the resolution on the device solve the issue? Okay, so very interesting question, Joe. And as Tim mentioned, one of the things we wanted to show you was it's completely possible to do that. Now, generally for guidance, a lot of this comes up for your own personal, let's say, scenarios, right? In certain scenarios, you may have a very large mobile application that is used primarily on the iPad. Well, in that case, your focus on all the views is going to be designing for iPad. In other cases, it may be for the desktop. I mean, desktop web is still the largest, set of browsers out there, and mobile's fast taking over that. So it really depends on your scenario. With Money Monkey demo, we showed you can do both in one Visual Studio project solution. So using DevExpress ASP.NET, you can make views for both in one project. So we're going to release Money Monkey demo source code in a minor release coming up very soon, and you'll see from that, or if you watch that webinar we mentioned earlier, you'll see that it's easy enough to simply have one page that when you browse to it from your desktop web will look like the desktop web version, and another one that uses the iOS theme. So, sorry, Joe, to make sure I answer your question properly, is it advantageous? It just depends on your scenario, right? It depends on how big the project is. Let's say if you have a lot of views, you may want to split it out just for managing the project easier. In my opinion, generally most mobile applications don't have hundreds of pages. Their views are shorter, but it's also easy enough with Visual Studio, which is a fantastic development platform, to just create subfolders for those views.
And one of the things that I think it was great working with you on that project was you also have to consider what is the intent of the user, right? Do you need to have the exact same information and all of those different views available on the various devices and mobile versus web? Which is something that is up to the business owner, really, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. So yeah, you should always keep in mind who you're designing for. What the content should really be driven by what you want to show to the end user. Because generally, because you have, let's say, the end user may have a 19-inch monitor or larger, going from that to, let's say, a 10-inch screen on an iPad, it's very different. So you want to maybe start thinking about scale in terms of what's the most important content you want to show off. And I believe we have a great story in 12.1 with DevExpress ASP.NET that essentially makes it super easy because you can easily apply that iOS theme that will convert your grid view, your scheduler, your list, and your menus over to iPad-friendly types. So it makes it easier to touch those targets and have all those goodies for the device.
Awesome. Mehul, we have one more question. Are you supporting ASP.NET MVC4?
Yes, we are, Andreas. Yes, so my recommendation is just start using it and let us know if you have any questions about it. But short answer, yeah, we've always support all of the latest Microsoft technologies when they're released. So MVC4 was in, I believe it's still in beta, but we are supporting it. And generally, whenever something is actually released, we do support it as well.
From Jay, I notice Tim is using a Mac. Does DevExpress work in a VR and test on the Mac? What would you recommend for testing all viewports, iPad, iPhone, etc.?
Well, let me answer that one real quick, Tim. So Tim is a designer, And that is the tool that you'll see that a lot of designers prefer just because there's a lot of great programs for it. And it's just a choice. But to answer your specific question, in my opinion, if you're going to do iOS testing, not development, iOS testing, it's useful to have the actual device or the mobile the Safari on an actual Mac. Because what happens is the Safari on the Windows doesn't quite render the same way. So there is an option in Safari for the desktop to emulate iOS. Unfortunately, the one for Windows doesn't quite emulate the same exact way the one on Mac does. So my suggestion is the best way to test any application is on the device. So actually get the device you're going to be testing for, and barring that, you can then maybe think about, okay, possibly using a Mac for that. In my opinion, I've just been a Windows developer for so long. I just love it. I love the laptops, the Lenovo's, and all that. But you know, it all depends in terms of what you're testing for. So first choice should always be the device. Second choice is for iOS specifically, you may want to think about, there are some decent emulators out there. In my opinion, though, the one, let's say if you have a Mac, then it may be easier and perhaps, I don't know, I won't say cheaper because it's not easy. But I'm sorry, Tim, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I didn't mean to cut you off at all. I was chuckling because you're totally right. And yeah, there are a few emulators out there on the web, but it is fundamentally different looking at the emulators when you're using a PC or when you're looking at it on a Mac, even though they're on a web, because you know, there's font differences, there's different displays. So I absolutely, wholeheartedly agree with you. Absolutely, the way to go is if you can use the device, but if not, at least use the different platform, because those are going to show you things. I mean, down to fundamentals like fonts, right? Where Sego UI is native on PCs and Helvetica is native on Macs, and that's going to totally change how things look and line up and work in some cases on the various platforms. So it could be as simple as that, and it makes a very big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I will put this out there. If you guys are interested in this iPad solution, it is really easy to. We have a file new project template, and I highly recommend you at least play with it. Take your existing applications, port them over, use the iOS theme, and if you upload it somewhere, ping us on Twitter, and just put a DevExpress hashtag, or you can get at me at Mehul Harry. I'd love to see what kind of stuff you guys build for the iPad. So yeah, absolutely. Check out these other webinars as well, and they'll show you how to get started with them.
Great. We do have a couple more questions that have popped up. Quick comparison to Kendo UI. What do you have in common? What are the differences from Andreas?
Yeah, great question, Andreas. So yeah, Kendo is a competing technology. It doesn't really compare. It's not a server-side technology, so it's a client-side only, meaning that their approach is very different. Now, for 12.1, we've decided that we wanted to help bridge the gap for developers who need to support these mobile tablets. And we based this on customer data. Not just our customers, but we looked at reports out there from Gartner and so forth, and they all said, look, enterprises don't want to have to retrain their staff in learning JavaScript or finding a JavaScript rock star that isn't available anyways. They want to leverage their existing investment in .NET, in Visual Studio, and Windows, while still being able to support these new devices and new multiple channels. And that's why for 12.1, what we did was we, I believe, have a great story which allows you to work in .NET, meaning you can choose any language, whether it's C#, F#, VB, and we allow you to create a web application with native look and feel for it. Now, Obviously, it's not a native application, but as you can see right here from the screenshot Tim has up, that feels like a native app. It responds to touch, it responds to scrolling, it responds to resizing, so yeah, orientation as well. So our story is very different from the one from Kendo. And the one from Kendo, like I said, it's just a difference of JavaScript versus .NET. And our current approach right now allows you to leverage your existing .NET skills and still target and use. And what's missing from a lot of the story here is that for ASP.NET, we have over 90 controls. 90 controls. I don't think there's a richer library out there that gives you charts, reporting, progress bars, editors, and these are all available to use on these devices. And so what we wanted to give you was, we don't want to take you through some version 1 issues of, how do we recreate this? And I believe we have a really good story in ASP.NET for these devices right now. So I hope that answers the question, Andreas.
Can we get to the camera on an iPad and iPhone from Jay?
Jay, great question. So one of the things I forgot to mention as well is, I get a lot of questions like, are you guys HTML5? So generally that can mean one of two things. What HTML5 really means, it's a new doc type, meaning it's a new standard that introduces a few new tags. It's built on top of XHTML4, and so unfortunately, though, a lot of confusion has come up around the word HTML5, because a lot of people use it to mean JavaScript or something. So I always try to take it for the literal meaning, which is it's actually the new HTML tags, the new CSS, and new JavaScript standards that are supported by these up-and-coming browsers. We are HTML5 compatible, meaning that if you declare your doc type to be HTML5, in fact, this Money Monkey demo and some of these other demos that we've released, they're HTML5. If you look at the HTML tag up at the top, meaning you can leverage and use this. Now, to answer your question, yes, it's possible to access some native resources on the device. The short answer is, because you're in the browser, you are sandboxed, meaning that when you visit a website, the website shouldn't automatically be able to snap a picture of you without your consent. And there is no way to get around that, and I don't think there should be, right? This was something that was developed early on in the web days when, there were some security loopholes and so forth. And so HTML5 allows you to possibly do it, meaning that you would still need the option of the end user to give consent that, yes, you can use my camera, yes, you can use my location, you can use certain device things as long as it's permitted, and I don't think there's any way to get around that permission.
Okay, let's see. Tim, did you have something to add?
No, just a great answer. Yeah, that's perfect.
From Andreas, is a combination with phone gap and the like possible?
Okay, so what Andreas is asking, there is some open source technology out there called PhoneGap. PhoneGap requires you to, how do I say, write in, let's say, JavaScript, and then it allows you to compile to some native applications depending on the platform. Andreas, I should have mentioned earlier when you were asking about Kendo and so forth, those are all exciting technologies that we're excited to see what's possible with them. It's certainly, how do I say, it's certainly something that DevExpress is always keeping an eye on, but it's nothing that I can much talk about today. I hope that answers the question. Unfortunately, I don't have a better answer for you, but right now with ASP.NET, we don't have a PhoneGap story because right now it's a web application, right? Meaning you're running ASP.NET, you're not writing PhoneGap code. PhoneGap has to be, you have to leverage specific for PhoneGap, right? And if that's what your need is, my recommendation, Andres, absolutely explore it. Right now, I think the story that we're trying to tell is, hey, if you want to get on iPad, this is the fastest way. I don't think there is a faster way to get on iPad because you're writing ASP.NET. You're not relearning new technologies. Yeah, absolutely. So Andres says standalone apps are a different story. Not necessarily standalone. I think you mean to say native. Native apps are absolutely different. And I think we have to keep in mind that while native apps are great, what's the cost? Are you ready to buy a Mac? Are you ready to get into the Apple Developer Program? Are you ready to learn Objective-C, Cocoa, new IDEs? And those are all fantastic. It's just a different platform. And unfortunately, it's not always at our disposal, maybe the time or the money or the effort. So it's really a question, and I believe if you keep in mind that, hey, my challenge to you would be, Andres, take what we've offered today with the file templates, with the project templates, with the theme, and see if that works for you. Because I believe it's a shorter way to get a really great looking app. And as Tim showed you in Money Monkey, and we have a couple other demos as well, you'll see that they are really fantastic. You can really do some very nice displays and have it look very native or close to native apps.
Great, thanks, Mehul. And then we're going to take one more question. Is there a way to access the iPad schedule to transfer data from the ASP.NET site database?
You mean if you're talking about like a local calendar data? If on the iPad you can use, I believe you can sync up to your Google Calendar or Microsoft Calendar. I believe there are a couple options to have the local calendar use a cloud-based calendar. And in that case, it doesn't matter for us because once you're in the cloud, you can easily access your ASP.NET to have, you can write against their API, or you can, our ASPX scheduler control works with iCal, with the iCalendar format. So in general, anything that supports iCalendar, our ASPX scheduler can support that.
All right, that is all the questions we have time for. Thank you, Tim and Mehul. All right, everybody, you can visit devexpress.com/webinars for our upcoming webinar sessions. Learn how to accelerate productivity, build stunning apps, and bridge tomorrow today with DXperience 12.1. You can try it for free at devexpress.com/trial right now. And again, thanks to Tim and Mehul. And of course, thank you all for joining us. Let's see what's developed. Bye-bye.